I mentioned Brother Ron Hallett too. He had his surgery a couple of weeks ago or more, and the doctors have now turned on the stimulator, and he was having some success. The last I talked to him earlier in the week or last weekend, I can't remember exactly when it was, but he's hoping that that will make it so that he can get all of his therapy in, regain his strength, and be back with us soon, and we pray for that too. We've been going through the book, or this long epic poem of Job, and we come today to chapter 29. The story of Job, of course, is the story of a blameless fellow who is stricken by every conceivable hurt. Loses his children and his wealth and his relationships and the support of his wife and everything. And this creates a crisis for Job and his friends, and a crisis really for Jewish theology. And so we continue with Job in chapter 29 as he kind of today finishes up all that he's wanting to tell his three friends. Have you considered my servant Job? Part 4 is about Job's shout of blamelessness, the shape and the shout of blamelessness. Job continued his discourse, 29:1. How I long for the months gone by, for the days when God watched over me. Have you ever thought, man, I wish I could just go back to last week? How different life seems now. I mean, this is the kind of thing that's going on. He imagines and he remembers when his lamp shone upon my head, and by his light I walked through darkness. Oh, for the days when I was in my prime. This is just a couple months ago. When God's intimate fellowship blessed my house, when the Almighty was still with me, and my children were around me, when my path was drenched with cream, and the rock poured out for me streams of olive oil. In every way, this is one-upping even Israel's experience of blessedness, right? It's not just water that came out of Job, the rock of Job, right? This is olive oil. And so Job in this chapter acknowledges his kind of personal loss, but the whole gist of this chapter, the overarching emphasis in chapter 29 is that Job remembers not just the light mood, not just the permeating blessing, the intimacy, his children, and the abundance of God, but the lion's share of this is all about the blessedness of social esteem, the blessedness of having a sense that your life matters more widely than just yourself. And so in verse 7, throughout the rest of this chapter, the whole thing is about the loss of social meaning for his life. Look at it. When I went to the gate of the city and took my seat in the public square, the young men saw me and stepped aside. The old men rose to their feet. The chief men refrained from speaking and covered their mouths with their hands. The voices of the nobles were hushed, and their tongues stuck to the roof of their mouths. Whoever heard me spoke well of me, and those who saw me commended me. because I rescued the poor who cried for help and the fatherless who had none to assist him. A man who was dying blessed me. I made the widow's heart sing. I put on righteousness as my clothing. Justice was my robe and my turban. My eyes to the blind. I was eyes to the blind and feet to the lame. I was a father to the needy. I took up the case of the stranger. I broke the fangs of the wicked and snatched the victims from their teeth. Now, remember in chapter 3, I'm just going to stop right there just briefly before I go on at verse 18. Remember in chapter 3, Job is at the point where he's ready to wish that he had never been. By this time, though, last week we saw the transformation of what suffering does to Job's imagination. And so by this time, Job is in a state where, yes, he's still in a deep sorrow, but it is now a deep appreciation for the blessedness of the life that he has lived. Okay? I thought, I will die in my own house, my days as numerous as the grains of sand. My roots will reach into the water, and the dew will lie all night on my branches. My glory will remain fresh in me, the bow ever new in my hand. Men listened to me expectantly, waiting in silence for my counsel. And after I had spoken, they spoke no more. My words fell gently on their ears. They waited for me as for showers, and drank in my words as the spring rain. Let me tell you something. This is every preacher's dream. Huh? And when I smiled at them, they scarcely believed it. The light of my face was precious to them. I chose the way for them and sat as their chief, dwelt as a king among his troops. I was like one who comforts mourners. Isn't that spectacular? So Job, in envisioning the blessedness of his blameless life, is envisioning the meaning that his life had in a wider community of people. That he was able, and physically and emotionally and spiritually able to make meaning and be helpful to the world all around him. And the world all around him was in a position where it could receive his blessing. Yeah? And so likewise, now in chapter 30, his pain is also primarily now a social pain, a spiritual pain that comes from losing sight of the wider social significance of his life. Does that make sense? Let's look at 31 through 9 here. But now they mock me, right? He went from a guy in full esteem to Jonathan Edwards fired. They made fun of him. But now they mock me, young men younger than I, whose fathers I would have disdained to put with my sheepdogs. I don't think he's being particularly intentionally mean here, as much as to draw the point out that, other people are really mean, and I wouldn't even want my dog near them because I'd be afraid that they'd beat the dog, right? Tina won't let just anybody sit her cats, I'm sure. Probably me among them, because she knows how I am about varmints. But, but of what use was the strength, verse 2, of their hands to me, since their vigor had gone from them? Haggard from want and hunger, they roamed the parched land and desolate wastelands at night. In the brush they gathered salt herbs, and their food was the root of the broom tree. They were banished from their fellow men, shouted at as if they were thieves. They were forced to live in the dry stream beds, among the rocks and in the holes in the ground. And they brayed among the bushes and huddled in the undergrowth, like animals would, right? And a base and nameless brood they were driven out of the land. And now their sons mock me. Their sons mock me in song. And so Job, I think, rather than trying to be mean to these people, is recognizing that there are people who live like animals and that have lost the esteem of society. And he's saying that even their kids now make fun of me. Those who were shoved aside, marginalized, they even now marginalize me. So we've gone from the height of social blessedness, an almost unbelievable kind of social esteem and meaning, to an unbelievable kind of marginalization, right? You with me? He's gone from worshiped nearly prince to riffraff of the worst kind, and even the riffraff won't have anything to do with me. Okay. Then in verse 10, they detest me and keep their distance. They don't hesitate to spit in my face. And now that God has unstrung my bow and afflicted me, they throw off restraint in my presence. On my right, the tribe attacks me. They lay snares for my feet. They build their siege ramps against me. They break up my road. They succeed in destroying me. They dismantle my personhood like a besieging army would dismantle the social structures of a country it's attacking. Verse 14, they advance through a gaping breach. Amidst the ruins they come rolling in. Terrors overwhelm me. My dignity is driven away as by the wind. My safety vanishes like a cloud, and now my life ebbs away. Days of suffering grip me. Night pierces my bones. My gnawing pains never rest. In His great power, God becomes like clothing to me. He binds me like the neck of my garment. He throws me into the mud, and I'm reduced to dust and ashes. I cry out to you, O God, but you do not answer. I stand up, but you merely look at me. You turn on me ruthlessly with the might of your hand. You attack me. You snatch me up and drive me before the wind. You toss me about in the storm. I know you will bring me down to death, to the place appointed for all the living. Surely no one lays a hand on a broken man when he cries for help in his distress. Have I not wept for those in trouble? Has not my soul grieved for the poor? Yet when I hoped for good, evil came. And when I looked for light, then came darkness. The churning inside me never stops. Days of suffering confront me. I go about blackened, but not by the sun. I stand up in the assembly and cry for help. I have become a brother of jackals, a companion of owls. The most unclean critters you can imagine, right? My skin grows black and peels. My body burns with fever. My harp is tuned to mourning, and my flute to the sound of wailing. When nothing of importance when nothing of importance seems fair anymore, Job's harp is tuned to mourning. He's lost all meaning. His life has lost its sense of social significance. Do we understand Job? Maybe the more important question here is, do we realize that Job understands us? That there is a long tradition in Scripture that understands exactly where we are. In our grief, in our sense of injustice, in our sense of not being able to make sense of certain things. God has provided a way for us to know that we are known. Then in chapter 31, Job ends all of his speeches by taking this oath. It's like a deposition for the trial that he has imagined now is somehow possible with God. Job acknowledges in this chapter 31, he's going to acknowledge what his so-called friends have been saying in some ways. He gives a summary account of his blamelessness and acknowledges that moral outrages, surely, if he had committed them, surely could account for his suffering. But in keeping his integrity, Job takes a fearless moral inventory and he accepts judgment if he fails the moral tests. And in this summary oath, we get a wide picture of Job's blamelessness, it seems to me, kind of a summary picture of it. Let's take a look at chapter 31 here as we close the reading this morning. Job says, I made a covenant with my eyes, not to look lustfully at a girl. For what is man's lot from God above? His heritage from the Almighty on high? Is it not ruin for the wicked, disaster for those who do wrong? Does he not see my ways and count my every step? If I had walked in falsehood, or my foot had hurried after deceit, let God weigh me in honest scales, and He will know that I am blameless. So Job says, you know, I've made a covenant with my eyes. I'm not even going to think about doing wrong and taking someone from somebody's household that doesn't belong to me. I'm not even going to look upon that, right? I've made a covenant with that because I know what righteously should happen to people who do that kind of thing. And if I've walked in falsehood or my foot has hurried after deceit, let God weigh me in honest scales. If I've cheated or lied, then I am subject to God's honest judgment. Yes? Blamelessness involves a covenant with your eyes. It involves a commitment to absolute honesty. And then verse 9, if my heart has been enticed by a woman, or if I have lurked at my neighbor's door, then may my wife grind another man's grain, and may another man sleep with her. Whew. Job understands the seriousness of this. Blamelessness for Job is about treating your neighbor right, treating people with respect, not using people for your own benefit, not using people as if they're just an obstacle to your own acquisition. Then verse 13, if I've denied justice to my men servants, and how you treat your employees. This is what blamelessness is all about. How do you treat your men servants and your maid servants when they had a grievance against me? What will I do when God confronts me, Job asks. What will I answer when called to account? Did not he who made me in the womb make them? Did not the same one form us both within our mothers? Blamelessness then has this capacity to see oneself in the eyes of others and to see others as part of oneself in a common kind of humanity, yes? It's to just kind of, in a primal way, identify with the other and know that, well, blamelessness treats others as I would like to be. Isn't that the golden rule as we've taught it? It's beneath all of these religious principles, beneath all of the 42 chapters of theologizing of Job, there is this simple sense that what is blameless is about treating other people the way I would want to be treated. It is to recognize in the other something of God in myself. And then in verse 16, if I've denied the desires of the poor, or let the eyes of the widow grow weary, if I've kept my bread to myself, not sharing it with the fatherless, all of that judgment would be okay. But from my youth I have reared him as would a father, and from my birth I have guided the widow. If I've seen anyone perishing for lack of clothing or needy, a man without a garment, and his heart did not bless me for warming him with the fleece from my sheep, if I've raised my hand against the fatherless, knowing that I have influence in court, then let my arm fall down from the shoulder and let it be broken off at the joint, for I dreaded destruction from God, and for fear of his splendor I could not do such things. The widow, the orphan, the fatherless, the poor, these people were always on my mind. I looked out and about and I paid attention to them. I didn't ignore the business of poverty. I didn't ignore the business of people being shipped off and on their own when they're 13 years old, right? I didn't just treat them as if they were the scum of the earth. I know that they've really just been abused as children and left to their own devices. I knew about the orphans and the widow. I didn't let the widows just waste away, lonely, all by themselves, yes? He was actively trying to see and work and help and bless those all around him. That's what blamelessness is. Verse 24, if I had put my trust in gold or said to pure gold, you're my security. If I have rejoiced over my great wealth, the fortune my hands had gained, if I had regarded the sun or radiance or the moon moving splendor, so that my heart was secretly enticed and my hand offered them a kiss of homage, then these also would be sins to be judged, for I would have been unfaithful to God on high. You know, sometimes we are just drawn to the security that mammon, the God mammon, offers, right? You are my retirement plan. And in Job's mind, that's just like kissing the idol to the sun god, or kissing the idol to Luna, the moon god, right? That's just sheer idolatry. It's placing created things in the place of God. It's putting your trust in stuff rather than putting your trust where it really belongs. It's not If I had said, God, you know, you're just going to have to come in second to my acquisition of money, then I would deserve all this. But God, I've tried not to put you down the ladder, right? I've tried to put you above work. I've tried to put you above all these things in my priorities and in my heart. And then in verse 29, if I have rejoiced at my enemy's misfortune. I'll never forget the time I just kind of rejoiced in I can't remember exactly who it was. It may have been Arnold Palmer or somebody. I was rooting for Jack Nicklaus, and they missed a putt. And I said, yes. And my dad said, you never root for the other guy to miss a putt. You don't root for a guy to miss. You want everybody to do their best. That's what was different about golf in that time. If I have ever rejoiced at my enemy's misfortune, or gloated over the trouble that came to him. If I had ever said, serves him right. Verse 30, if I'd not allowed my mouth to sin by invoking a curse against his life, if the men of my household have never said, who has not had his fill of Job's meat? But no stranger had to spend the night in the street, for my door was always open to the traveler. If I have concealed, verse 30, let's just hold off on verse 33. So Job's really showing us that blamelessness is this promise that you're not going to live your life in a kind of comparison. Like, I don't want that guy to succeed because that makes me look bad. Or I'm not going to feel bad about myself because I don't have as much as, oh, so-and-so. You know what I'm saying? You all know anything about jealousy? Job is saying, my sense of self has not been centered around competition and comparisons. I'm not bitter because of the other fellow's success. I'm not bitter because I don't seem to succeed because of as well as somebody else. That's not where it's been. In fact, verse 32, hospitality has been my life. My house is your house. The stranger's not turned away. The crowning moral achievement in the Near East is always hospitality. And the pivotal nature of hospitality and the welcoming of the stranger, the hospitality shown to those who are different. This is part of Job's blamelessness. Now, it's not, verse 33, a kind of perfection as we think of utter flawlessness, because in verse 33 it says, if I have concealed my sin as men do by hiding my guilt in my heart, because I so feared the crowd and so dreaded the contempt of the clans that I kept silent and would not go outside. Oh, if Job's saying, if I had hidden my sin rather than confessing it, then I could understand that. But my life has been about sharing my failures with those around me, admitting it, just living into a better life by acknowledging what it is. If I had tried to hide my imperfections, if I had tried always to put my best foot forward and look better than what I am, then I could get all of this coming down upon me. You know, the great power of sin is secrecy. And the great liberating ordinance for transformation and victory is confession. We do still know this, right? And so Job says, you know, my life has been characterized by this. I've been trying to do that my whole life, and I honestly don't know what all of this other stuff now that has happened to me is about. And then he decides he's just going to sign his defense. Oh, verse 35, that I had someone to hear me. I sign now my defense. Let the Almighty answer me. Let my accuser put his indictment in writing. Surely I would wear it on my shoulder. I would put it on like a crown. I would give him an account of my every step like a prince. I would approach him. Isn't that interesting? Job, like a prince, is revered and blessed by the whole community. Then he loses everything and he's thrown out with the owls and the jackals. Right? But here, Job finds a way back to his significance for his life. He finds a way back to his princely identity, and he stakes everything, his entire dignity and the meaning of his whole life, on what he believes is going to be a real trial with God. I would give him an account of my every step like a prince. I would approach him. And then in verse 38, he's got a witness. If my land cries out against me, and all its furrows are wet with tears, if I have devoured its yield without payment, or broken the spirit of its tenants, then let briars come up instead of wheat, and weeds instead of barley. The land itself, right? Primally, we're all tenders together of the land, and if I have not made proper sacrifice, if I have not made proper distributive kinds of allotments to those who help me harvest, if any of those things have in any way been a part of my life, then I just would invoke that the due punishment to that kind of selfishness come down on me, and let the land itself bear witness to my selfishness, right? Let the land cry out to God for justice as it does. And so Job, in full view of the earth, cries out, I'm innocent. Well, what's that mean for us today? It won't come any surprise to any of you that I think that there are three things that I want to mention. I was raised well. First, I would say that blamelessness prayerfully takes pain and our raw emotions to God. Blamelessness prayerfully takes pain and our raw emotions to God. Like so many of us, Job wants the world to be fair. And we become angry at the world and at others and then at ourselves and then ultimately at God when it all too often is not fair. But Job burrows down further, wondering, where is my anger coming from? Well, he says or thinks, I think, well, it comes from the innate expectation that life should be fair. You with me? Burrow on down a little further and ask, well, where does that expectation come from? Where does this innate expectation that things should be fair come from? Does it not come from the innate sense that God and the universe should be filled with wisdom and justice and even mercy? I'm mad because I thought God was just and fair and merciful. It is Job's confidence, you see, his belief that somehow God is indeed these things, that God indeed loves him, despite the trauma and the hurts of the world. It's this confidence in the goodness of God that makes him outraged by his suffering, and it is his confidence in God and in the goodness of God that gives him the courage or the audacity to challenge God in a day of court. The only way he's going to do that is if he really believes God does love him. Yeah? And so there's a whole tradition of lament that understands how we feel. There is a God who, though often silent, you and I may discover actually does share our rage and can bear with it within us. Amen? The second thing that blameless does is that blamelessness is about keeping and not violating social relations. It's about empathy for the other. It's about recognition that we are in things together, people. It doesn't say, like my son's childhood friend, if I want to be nosy, that's my business. Huh? That's interesting. In other words, blamelessness doesn't hold others to one standard and me to another. It recognizes that the same God formed us all inside of our mothers, right? Beneath all this education and the principles of theology, beneath all the theology of 42 chapters of this poem, is this: can I see and regard the other as myself? Can I see God, the creator of the other, and me together? Can I see God and myself in deep communion with the other? Blamelessness is less about not drinking and smoking or chewing or dating girls that do, right? Than it is about sharing, making sure that God and people are always placed above my material and selfish interests. Blamelessness has a lot to do with money and faithfulness and sharing and equity and making sure that people are fairly treated. Third, blamelessness can take a fearless moral inventory. You know, these fearless moral inventories are harder than we think. I was sitting in the waiting room, this fellow wrote not too long ago, for my first appointment with a new dentist, he said. I noticed his DDS diploma, which showed his full name. Suddenly I remembered a tall, handsome, dark-haired boy with the same name who I had been in my high school class some 40-odd years ago. Could this be the same guy that I had a secret crush on way back then, she thought. Upon seeing him, however, I quickly discarded any such thought. This balding, gray-haired man with the deep-lined face was way too old to have been my classmate. After he examined my teeth, I asked him if he had attended Morgan Park High School. Yes, I did. I'm a Mustang, he beamed with pride. When did you graduate, I asked. He answered, well, 1980. Why do you ask? Well, you were in my class, I exclaimed. He looked at me closely. And then that ugly, old, bald, wrinkled, fat, gray, disgusting man asked, what did you teach? You see, we see death creeping up on others, but we find it more difficult to see death creeping up on us, don't we? Fearless moral inventories are fearless not because it can be done without any trepidation, but honestly, the fearlessness comes from a willingness to say, I don't have anything to fear if God loves me. It is so hard to say, I don't care if all of my illusions do come down and I become a disillusioned person, and all the lies that I tell myself to make myself feel decent, if they all do come down, I'm still going to press in. I'm still going to keep praying. I'm still going to keep asking. I'm still going to keep in conversation, even with the DDS, right, who is my classmate. And so this morning I encourage us to the blameless life, right? To the blameless life that takes pain to God, to the blameless life that doesn't treat others as things for our own pleasure, but rather our equals who have a claim on our pocketbooks and our hospitality and our time. To the blameless life that keeps inventory, that keeps a real moral inventory and confesses our sins to one another, not confessing one another's sins. Not as the world does, but as Jesus taught us. For our God ultimately is good and just and merciful, even in the face of injustice now, even in the face of incomprehensible suffering, who is big enough to share our wrath and our hurt and lead us very soon into His gracious care of all things. To the blameless life this morning as we stand and sing.